Black billionaire sees. 4 street girls, freezes, when they look like his ex-wife. The Rolls-Royce Cullinan purred to a stop at the corner of Peachtree and 10th in Midtown Atlanta, its obsidian black frame gleaming under the winter sun. Jamal Richardson leaned back against the buttery leather seat, loosening the top button of his charcoal gray suit. For once, he allowed himself a small smile. Another merger sealed, another empire swallowed, another reminder that there were very few things in this world Jamal Richardson could not conquer. "Would you like me to pull into the garage, sir?" his driver, Morris, asked, glancing back through the rearview mirror. "No," Jamal said, his deep voice cutting through the hum of the heater. "I need to stretch my legs." "I'll walk the rest of the way." Maurice hesitated but nodded. "Very well, sir." Jamal stepped out onto the sidewalk, the crisp December air biting against his skin. Midtown buzzed with life. Young professionals hustled to their appointments. Tourists snapped photos of street art, the familiar symphony of Atlanta's pulse filling the air. Jamal adjusted his coat and began weaving through the crowd, his mind already drifting back to his next move. An IPO in Singapore, a potential acquisition of a failing tech giant in Silicon Valley. He didn't see them at first. At the intersection, clustered on the corner where the sidewalk cracked against an aging lamppost, 4 little girls stood huddled together. They wore mismatched coats, too large, too thin, and threadbare gloves that barely shielded their small hands from the cold. Plastic buckets filled with homemade flower arrangements sat at their feet, and a worn cardboard sign rested against the pole. "Flowers for Hope." $5. Jamal would have walked past them. On any other day, he would have passed without a glance, a billionaire too accustomed to shielding himself from the sight of desperation. But something made him pause. The tilt of their chins, the proud, stubborn set of their mouths. A chill deeper than the winter air raced down his spine. Jamal turned his head, almost against his will, and truly looked. They weren't just 4 street kids trying to survive. They were nearly identical, like mirrors of each other. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same coffee-brown skin, the same coiled hair peeking out from under mismatched beanies. But it wasn't their resemblance to each other that left Jamal rooted to the spot, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. It was their resemblance to her, Sierra. 10 years hadn't dulled her from his memory. The ex-wife he'd driven away in a storm of anger and betrayal. The woman he'd loved once with a ferocity so intense it scared him, and later hated with an equal fire when she told him the one thing he could never accept: that she was pregnant, that the child was his, despite the doctors telling him it was impossible. He had thrown her out that night, thrown out their marriage, thrown out everything. And now, standing on a cracked sidewalk in the middle of Atlanta, he was staring into the same emerald-green eyes that once haunted his dreams. Except this time, there were 4 of them. One of the girls, the boldest, stepped forward, a small bouquet in her trembling hands. "Would you like to buy some flowers, mister?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the cold that turned her breath into mist. "They're fresh, only $5. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His world spun wildly off its axis. Another girl nudged the first, whispering something. They all turned to stare at him now, identical gazes piercing through his $1,000 coat, through his shield of power and money, straight into the place he had locked away for a decade. The first girl frowned slightly. "Are you okay, mister?" Jamal knelt slowly, as if moving too fast would shatter the fragile reality forming around him. His hand trembled as he reached into his coat pocket for his wallet. He pulled out a $100 bill, extending it toward the girl. "I'll take all the flowers," he said hoarsely. Her eyes widened. "All of them?" He nodded, unable to say anything more. The other girls scrambled, gathering their bouquets with a practiced efficiency that broke his heart. This wasn't their first day hawking hope on a freezing street corner. "Thank you, mister," the first girl said, handing him a ragged bouquet of daisies tied together with a piece of frayed ribbon. "God bless you." As they turned to leave, Jamal found his voice. "Wait," he said, and they froze. "What's your name?" he asked, looking directly into the eyes of the girl who had spoken. "I'm Ayana," she said proudly, "and these are my sisters, Maya, Nia, and Zoe." Ayana, Maya, Nia, Zoe. Their names settled into his chest like stones. Beautiful, strong, unmistakably hers. "Where's your mama?" he asked before he could stop himself, the words raw and aching. Ayana stiffened. The other girls shifted uncomfortably. "She's not here," Ayana said carefully. "She's working." The lie was obvious. Jamal had built an empire by reading people, and he knew instinctively this little girl had learned early how to shield herself from dangerous questions. Before he could ask anything else, a battered blue minivan honked from across the street. A woman, older, white hair tucked under a knitted cap, waved frantically from the driver's seat. "We gotta go," Ayana said quickly. She grabbed Zoe's hand, and the other girls followed, darting across the intersection toward the van. Jamal stood there, flowers wilting in his hand, as the minivan rumbled away into the labyrinth of Atlanta's back streets. A gust of wind tugged at the cardboard sign they'd left behind. It tumbled down the sidewalk and landed at Jamal's feet. Slowly, he bent down and picked it up. "Flowers for hope." A bitter laugh escaped his throat. Hope. 10 years ago, Sierra had begged him to have hope, to believe in her, to believe in a miracle. He had chosen anger instead. Jamal straightened, the sign still in his hand. The board meeting he was supposed to attend, the congratulatory dinner scheduled for tonight. None of it mattered anymore. He had seen something today that shattered his perfectly ordered world. And deep down, he knew. He hadn't just walked past 4 little girls selling flowers. He had walked past his future. He shoved the flowers into the crook of his arm, pulled his phone from his pocket, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Get me Marcus," he barked when the line connected. Marcus Shaw, his private investigator, a man who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you what color the thread was. "Marcus," Jamal said when the gruff voice answered. "I need you to find someone. 4 little girls." Midtown Atlanta, selling flowers on Peachtree. They're about 9 or 10. "Identical." There was a pause. "You think they're your kids?" "I don't know," Jamal said, his voice low. "But I need to know everything. And Marcus, move fast." He hung up, heart hammering. For the first time in a decade, Jamal Richardson, billionaire, conqueror, kingmaker, felt utterly powerless, and he wasn't going to rest until he found out why. Chat. The ticking of the grandfather clock in Jamal Richardson's penthouse grew louder in the heavy silence of the room. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering sprawl of Atlanta at night. In one hand, he held the drooping bouquet of daisies. In the other, his phone, the screen dark and smudged with fingerprints from his restless pacing. Where were they now? The question gnawed at him more viciously than any boardroom battle ever had. For the first time in years, Jamal wasn't thinking about quarterly profits or strategic expansions. He was thinking about 4 little girls, bundled in second-hand coats, holding pieces of a life he had thrown away. His phone buzzed on the side table. "Marcus." He snatched it up. "Talk." "I got something," Marcus said, his voice gruff but charged with urgency. The girls, Ayana, Maya, Nia, and Zoe, are listed under the care of a woman named Ruth Avery. She runs a battered women's and children's shelter called New Hope House, Midtown, just a few blocks from where you saw them. Ruth Avery? Jamal repeated, the name unfamiliar. Yeah, retired social worker. Took custody of the girls about 6 months ago when their mother disappeared. Jamal's stomach twisted. Disappeared? Word is she was picked up on petty theft charges, grocery store, caught stealing bread, milk, baby wipes. Nothing fancy, but she got slapped hard by the judge. Jamal's hand curled into a fist. Where is she now? Fulton County Jail. Been there about 4 months? A punch to the gut would have felt kinder. And their mother's name? Jamal asked, though he already knew the answer deep in his bones. Sierra Bennett, Marcus confirmed. Your ex-wife. Jamal turned away from the city lights, pressing a hand to his forehead. Sierra, in jail. For stealing food. While he lounged in penthouses and closed billion-dollar deals, she had been fighting for survival, and he hadn't even known. I need to see them, Jamal said, voice low. You sure about that? Marcus asked cautiously. They're in a shelter, man. They don't know you. You showing up out of nowhere could scare the hell out of them. I don't care, Jamal said, harsher than intended. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. But you're right. It has to be done carefully. He glanced down at his tailored suit, the shining Rolex on his wrist, the image of a man who had everything except what mattered. I'm going to the shelter, Jamal said, grabbing his coat. Find out everything you can about Ruth Avery. I need to know who's protecting them. He hung up before Marcus could answer. Minutes later, Jamal's Rolls-Royce glided through streets that grew rougher, darker, more desperate with each passing block. High-rises gave way to crumbling buildings tagged with graffiti. Bright storefronts faded into boarded-up windows. The car stopped in front of a squat, weather-beaten building. New Hope House. Its paint peeled like old scabs. Iron bars crisscrossed the windows. A chain-link fence sagged around a tiny yard littered with broken toys. Yet in the middle of all that decay, a light glowed warmly from inside. Jamal hesitated. In this place, his wealth, his name, his power meant nothing. He climbed out of the car and crossed the cracked sidewalk to the shelter's front door. A security camera buzzed softly above the entrance. He pressed the rusted intercom button. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker. Yes? My name's Jamal Parker, he said, using an alias Marcus had suggested. I heard you might need volunteers. There was a long pause. Jamal shifted from foot to foot, feeling absurd. He wasn't sure what he expected, that someone would fling the door open and usher him inside because he suddenly had a conscience. Finally, a loud buzz, and the door clicked open. Inside, the air smelled of cheap disinfectant and old linoleum, but it was warm. Children's laughter drifted down the hallway, thin but real. A woman appeared at the end of the hall. Ruth Avery. She was short, sturdy, her dark brown hair streaked with gray, and her expression was the kind that had seen too much hardship to trust easily. She sized him up instantly, eyes narrowing at the expensive cut of his clothes, even muted by the casual sweater he'd thrown over his shirt. You're a long way from Buckhead, Mr. Parker, she said dryly. I wanted to help, Jamal said simply. Her mouth twitched like she didn't quite buy it, but didn't have the energy to argue. Fine, she said. We always need a pair of hands. She led him into a cramped office cluttered with outdated computers and battered file cabinets. A bulletin board sagged under the weight of paper notices, missing persons, free legal aid clinics, community college night classes. Jamal kept his hands at his sides, resisting the urge to clean the place with his checkbook. We do dinner at 6, Ruth said, handing him a stained apron. You'll help serve. Don't expect gratitude. Most of the people here have learned that trust is just another word for betrayal. Jamal nodded. He didn't deserve trust yet anyway. He moved mechanically, serving lukewarm spaghetti onto plastic trays, handing out milk cartons, wiping down sticky tables. The other volunteers, mostly exhausted women and a few elderly men, gave him curious glances but said little. It was only when the dinner rush was over and he was stacking chairs that he saw them. Ayana, Maya, Nia, and Zoe. They entered the cafeteria in a tight knot, each carrying a small plastic bucket. Their heads were bent together, talking quietly. Their mismatched coats hung loosely on their small frames. And even here, even stripped of everything, they carried themselves with a kind of stubborn dignity that broke Jamal's heart all over again. Ruth followed his gaze. You met them already, huh? She said quietly. I saw them selling flowers, Jamal admitted. Ruth sighed. Those girls have been through hell. Their mother, Sierra, she did everything right. Worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, kept them off the streets. Until the world decided hard work wasn't enough. Why didn't anyone help? Jamal asked, anger simmering under his skin. Ruth shrugged bitterly. Shelters are full. Programs are underfunded. Judges are overloaded. Nobody cares until it's too late. Jamal's jaw tightened. Not anymore, he thought. Not this time. Ayana glanced up and caught him staring. She stiffened, her small hand tightening around her bucket's handle. Ruth touched his arm. They don't trust easily. Don't push. I won't, Jamal promised. But he would be back, every day, if he had to. He would earn their trust. Because somewhere out there, Sierra was fighting for her life, and these 4 precious girls, the daughters he never knew he had, deserved better. And Jamal Richardson was going to move heaven and earth to give it to them. No matter what it cost. The next morning, Jamal was back at New Hope House before the sun crested the skyline. The shelter's battered sign seemed even more worn in the weak daylight, but inside, life buzzed with quiet determination. He tucked his baseball cap lower to shield his face. The last thing he needed was to attract attention. The girls needed normalcy, not a billionaire throwing his name around. Not yet. In the cramped kitchen, Ruth greeted him with a suspicious glance over her coffee mug. You again, she said without surprise. I said I wanted to help, Jamal answered, picking up a dish towel, and I meant it. Ruth studied him a moment longer, then gestured toward a pile of laundry bags by the back door. Congratulations, you just volunteered yourself for laundry duty. He smiled grimly and got to work, hauling the heavy bags toward the ancient washing machines. As he passed the common room, he heard the soft chatter of children. Peeking in, he saw them. Ayana, Maya, Nia, and Zoe. The quadruplets were huddled around a battered table, organizing what little inventory they had left, drooping carnations, wilted daisies, and a few crumpled buckets. Their tiny hands worked quickly and efficiently, the kind of practice speed no child should ever have to master. He hesitated, his heart pulling him toward them. But he forced himself to stay back. He needed to earn his place, not force it. Halfway through his 3rd load of laundry, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he found himself face to face with Ayana, the boldest of the 4. Her dark eyes were sharp with suspicion. Why are you really here? She demanded, arms crossed over her chest. Jamal straightened, wiping his hands on the towel. I told you, to help. You don't look like you need to be here, she said bluntly. You look like you belong in one of those shiny buildings downtown. Her words hit deeper than she could know. I used to think that too, Jamal said carefully. But sometimes, the things that really matter aren't in shiny buildings. She narrowed her eyes. You ain't no regular volunteer. Jamal smiled slightly. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean I don't care. Before she could press further, Ruth called from the hallway. Girls, time to get ready. Street fair today, big crowds. Good money. Ayana gave Jamal one last piercing look before spinning on her heel and jogging after her sisters. Jamal watched them go, a slow, heavy feeling settling in his chest. These girls weren't just resilient. They were fierce. Survivors, just like their mother. He spent the next few hours scrubbing floors, mending a broken chair, and fixing a leaky faucet. Anything to make himself useful. Anything to buy a little more trust. As he worked, he caught snippets of conversation between the shelter staff and residents. Poor Sierra, one woman said, shaking her head. All she wanted was to keep those girls together. System don't care about that, another replied bitterly. Just another black woman swept under the rug. Jamal's fists clenched involuntarily. Sierra had fought, and the world had turned its back. Not anymore. By noon, the shelter buzzed with excitement. The girls had donned mismatched but clean coats, and each carried a small bucket filled with fresh flowers. Ruth handed Jamal a battered backpack. If you're serious about helping, she said, you'll carry the extra water bottles and snacks. Happy to, he replied, slipping the pack over his shoulders. The street fair was a 10-minute walk from the shelter, a chaotic mix of food stalls, handmade crafts, and street performers. It was bright and noisy, overwhelming even to Jamal. But the girls handled it like pros. Ayana took the lead, scouting out the best corners. Maya handled the money with quick, practiced hands. Nia arranged the bouquets, her artistic flair shining through even with limited resources. And Zoe, sweet, quiet Zoe, flashed shy smiles at passers-by, melting even the hardest hearts. Jamal hung back, acting as a quiet bodyguard. He carried the buckets when they grew too heavy, fetched water when they were thirsty, kept an eye out for trouble. More than once he caught people giving the girls pitying looks, but the girls didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they just refused to let it touch them. Around mid-afternoon, business slowed. Jamal bought hot dogs for everyone from a vendor and found them a shady patch of grass to sit on. As they ate, the girls talked among themselves, half forgetting his presence. I miss Mama, Zoe said quietly, picking at her bun. We'll see her soon, Nia said, trying to sound confident. Ruth said so. Ayana muttered something too low for Jamal to catch, but Maya shot her a warning look. Hey, Jamal said gently, your mom must be pretty amazing. All four girls looked up at him, surprised. She is, Zoe said fiercely, surprising everyone, including herself. She taught us everything, Maya added, how to tie our shoes, how to make flowers pretty, how to be strong. She used to say, Nia chimed in, that no matter how small we felt, we had big hearts. Big enough to change the world. Jamal swallowed past the lump rising in his throat. Ayana was still watching him, suspicion warring with something softer. Did you know her? She asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. Maybe a long time ago, he said carefully. Before you were born. Their faces lit up with curiosity, but before they could bombard him with more questions, a commotion erupted across the fairgrounds. A security guard was arguing with a street vendor. Voices were rising. Jamal instinctively shifted, moving between the girls and the potential threat. Stay here, he ordered softly. He edged closer, assessing the situation. It wasn't serious. Just a dispute over a permit. But the raised voices had already attracted a crowd, and that crowd wasn't kind to kids selling flowers. He heard it before he saw it. "Get those kids out of here," someone sneered. "Begging for money, disgraceful." Jamal turned to see a heavyset man in a vendor apron scowling at the girls. "Taking up space real sellers could use," the man added, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. The girls froze, their faces shuddering with practiced resignation. Jamal felt the slow burn of rage rise inside him. Not today. He walked calmly back to them, positioning himself squarely between the girls and their accuser. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The man looked him up and down, sneering at the casual clothes, missing the power vibrating beneath the surface. "Yeah, there's a problem," the man barked. "These little beggars don't belong here." Jamal smiled thinly, the kind of smile that had made Fortune 500 CEOs lose millions in negotiations. "They're selling flowers," he said. "Legally. They're licensed through the shelter." The man blustered, his face reddening. "I don't care about no license. They're ruining the image of the fair." At that, Jamal stepped closer, his full height and intensity bearing down on the man. "You want to talk about ruining images?" he said quietly. "Maybe look in a mirror." The man paled and backed off, muttering under his breath. Satisfied, Jamal turned to the girls. "You're fine," he said. "Ignore him." For the first time, Ayana looked at him without suspicion, maybe even with a tiny flicker of trust. As they packed up their buckets later that evening, Zoe slipped her small hand into Jamal's. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently, feeling something crack open in his chest. "No," he whispered back. "Thank you." He didn't know how yet, but he was going to fix this. All of it. Whatever it took. Châteaufourne. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Jamal had never imagined himself living. Morning coffee runs for the shelter, afternoons spent fixing broken windows or hauling groceries, evenings helping the girls sell flowers on different street corners. The city's noise, once background to his high-stakes deals, became the soundtrack to something quieter, something more real. Each day, the girls thawed a little more. Iana, ever the skeptic, tested him with pointed questions. Maya grilled him on math and business. Nia asked him to critique her flower arrangements with a solemnity that made him grin. And Zoe, sweet Zoe, simply trusted with the fierce simplicity only a child could offer. Still, Jamal knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. Trust built slowly, especially when betrayal had marked their young lives. One night, after the girls were tucked into their cots at New Hope House, Ruth called him into her office. She closed the door behind him, her expression serious. "You're not who you're pretending to be," she said flatly. Jamal didn't bother denying it. He just waited. "I did some checking," she continued. "You're Jamal Carter, founder of Carter Technologies, net worth estimated at, what, $7 billion? 8 last quarter," he said dryly. Ruth didn't laugh. "Why hide it?" "Because the last thing those girls need is another adult walking into their lives pretending to be something they're not," Jamal said, voice low. "They deserve real, not a charity case." Ruth leaned back in her chair, studying him. "And what are you planning to do?" she asked. "Whatever it takes to help them," he said without hesitation, starting with finding out what really happened to Sierra. At the mention of the girl's mother, Ruth's face softened. "She's a good woman," Ruth said. "Worked herself to the bone trying to keep those girls together. The system chewed her up anyway." Jamal's jaw tightened. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Ruth laid it out. The eviction when Sierra lost her third job, the endless bureaucracy that offered no real help, the theft charges when Sierra tried to feed her daughters during a brutal winter. Jamal listened, his anger building. The system had failed them, and he had the means to fight it. But he needed more. He needed proof. The next morning, Jamal made calls. Discreet calls. By noon, he had hired a private investigator named Malik Johnson, a former NYPD detective with a reputation for digging where others feared to tread. Malik met him at a quiet diner on the edge of Harlem. "You want everything on Sierra Evans and her court case?" Malik asked, flipping open a notebook. "And anyone who might have had a hand in making sure she stayed down," Jamal said. "Dig deep." "Judges, social workers, anyone." Malik nodded, his sharp eyes gleaming with understanding. "You think someone stacked the deck?" "I know it," Jamal said grimly, "and I'm going to tear it down." It took Malik 3 days to uncover the first thread. He slid a folder across the booth at their next meeting. "The judge on Sierra's case, Calvin Monroe, he's got a history. Disproportionate sentences for low-income defendants. Especially black women." Jamal's mouth tightened. "Anyone else?" "The prosecutor, too," Malik said. "A guy named Stephen Drake. Filed for re-election right after Sierra's case wrapped. Heavy donations from developers trying to gentrify the Lower East Side." Jamal flipped through the documents. Donation records, case histories, damning patterns. "They wanted the shelter cleared," Malik said quietly. "Sierra getting evicted, then arrested, meant one less barrier. The girls becoming wards of the state was just collateral damage." Jamal felt the old rage rising, the same fire that had driven him to build an empire from nothing. Only this time it wasn't about proving himself. It was about justice. He leaned back, mind racing. "If we can prove misconduct," he said, "we can appeal Sierra's sentence, maybe even get her record expunged." Malik nodded. "It'll take more than just this. We need a lawyer willing to take the fight public." "I know someone," Jamal said, thinking of an old friend from college who had become one of the top civil rights attorneys in the state. He stood, pocketing the folder. "I want full background checks on Monroe and Drake," he said. "Anything shady, I want to know about it." "You got it," Malik said. As Jamal left the diner, his phone buzzed. A text from Ruth. "Come quickly, it's about the girls." His heart slammed into his ribs as he hailed a cab. When he burst into the shelter, Ruth met him at the door, her face pale. "A woman came by," she said. "Claimed she was a caseworker. Had paperwork saying the girls needed to be moved to a group home. Said the shelter was too unstable." Jamal cursed under his breath. "Where are the girls now?" "Safe," Ruth said. "I stalled her. Said they were at a doctor's appointment, but she's coming back tomorrow." Jamal closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to think. Someone was accelerating the timeline. Someone who didn't want the girls under Sierra's or his protection. He looked at Ruth, his voice low and deadly calm. "We're not going to let them take those girls." "No," Ruth agreed fiercely. "We're not." That night, Jamal sat in his penthouse, staring out over the city he had conquered. And for the first time, he realized how powerless he felt against a system designed to crush people like Sierra. Like Ayanna, Maya, Nia, and Zoe. But he wasn't the scared, angry kid from the projects anymore. He was Jamal Carter. And he had resources most people couldn't even imagine. It was time to use them. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first, to his lawyer friend. The second, to a public relations specialist known for making small injustices explode into national scandals. If the system wanted a quiet sweep under the rug, Jamal was going to make sure the whole world was watching instead. By morning, the city would know the names of 4 little girls who refused to be forgotten, and so would the people who had tried to erase them. The morning sun had barely risen over New York When Jamal Carter stood outside the courthouse, a sharp figure in a tailored navy overcoat, his jaw set hard. Around him, the city moved at its relentless pace, vendors setting up, cabs blaring horns. But for Jamal, everything felt focused, crystal clear. Today wasn't just about business deals or boardrooms. Today was about reclaiming a family he had never known he had lost. His lawyer, Malika Bryant, met him on the courthouse steps. A powerhouse civil rights attorney with a reputation for dismantling injustice, she carried herself with a confidence that matched Jamal's own. "Everything's filed," she said briskly, handing him a copy of the emergency motion. "Motion to reopen Sierra Evans' case based on judicial misconduct and systemic bias." "And the media?" Jamal asked without looking at the papers. "Already circling," Malika said with a half-smile. "You wanted national attention? You're about to get it." Jamal exhaled slowly. He could handle the spotlight. He had lived under it for years. But this time the stakes were higher than profit margins. This time, it was personal. Inside the courtroom, Judge Calvin Monroe presided with his usual imperious air. A man who prided himself on maintaining order, but whose version of order too often meant crushing those least able to fight back. Jamal and Malika took their seats as the clerk announced the case. Across the aisle, Stephen Drake, the smirking prosecutor who had railroaded Sierra, shuffled his papers with a growing sense of unease. Malika stood, her voice steady and commanding. "Your Honor, we are here to present new evidence demonstrating a pattern of judicial bias and prosecutorial misconduct in the case of Sierra Evans." Judge Monroe arched an eyebrow. "This is highly irregular," he drawled. "The case was decided months ago." "And it was decided unjustly," Malika shot back. "We have proof of improper communications between the prosecution and your office, Your Honor, regarding the sentencing of Ms. Evans." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jamal watched Monroe carefully. The judge's hand twitched slightly, an almost imperceptible tell. Drake jumped to his feet. "Objection. These accusations are baseless and defamatory." "We have documented donations, Your Honor," Malika continued smoothly, ignoring Drake. "Campaign contributions tied directly to individuals who benefited from the displacement of low-income residents, including Mrs. Evans." She handed a thick stack of documents to the bailiff, who carried them to the bench. For a long moment, Monroe flipped through the evidence. His face remained a mask, but Jamal saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. "You'll have your hearing," Monroe said finally, voice tight. "But I warn you, counselor, this court will not tolerate grandstanding." Malika nodded once, victorious. As they exited the courtroom, Jamal felt a hand grip his arm. He turned to see Ruth, her face pale but determined. "The girls," she said urgently. "They're in danger." "What happened?" Jamal asked, all the blood draining from his face. "That woman from Child Protective Services. She came back this morning with police backup. Said she had an emergency order to take them to a foster facility." Jamal's stomach twisted. "Where are they now?" "At the shelter," Ruth said. "But they won't hold out for long. You need to act." Malika was already dialing her phone. "I'll get a stay order," she said. "It'll buy us a few days." Jamal nodded, mind racing. "We need to keep them safe until Sierra is free," he said. "No matter what it takes." Back at New Hope House, the girls sat huddled together in Ruth's office, their small faces drawn with fear. When Jamal entered, Zoe ran to him first, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist. "Are they going to take us away?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not if I can help it," Jamal said fiercely, kneeling to meet her eyes. The other girls clustered around him. "We heard them," Ayanna said, fists clenched. "Saying we don't have a real family," that we belong somewhere else. You have a family, Jamal said. Me, Ruth, Sierra, and soon we're going to be together again. But why? Maya asked, her eyes too old for her young face. Why do they want to split us up? Jamal swallowed hard. Because sometimes, he said carefully, people care more about rules and appearances than about doing what's right. That's stupid, Nia said fiercely, and Jamal smiled despite the lump in his throat. It is, he agreed. At that moment, Ruth burst in, waving a piece of paper. We have a temporary injunction, she said breathlessly. No removal until the court reviews the motion. The girls looked confused, but Jamal stood, relief washing over him. We have time, he said. Now we fight. For the next 24 hours, Jamal worked the phones like a man possessed. He called every contact he had in the media, leaking the story. 4 young girls, threatened with separation because of bureaucratic corruption. A mother unjustly imprisoned. A billionaire fighting for justice against a system stacked against the powerless. By the next morning, headlines screamed across the city. Billionaire's secret battle, saving 4 sisters from the system. Corruption allegations, Rock family court. Who is protecting New York's most vulnerable? Outside New Hope House, news vans lined the street. Microphones and cameras pointed at anyone coming or going. Jamal stood in front of the shelter with Ruth and the girls at his side, delivering a calm but powerful statement. We will not allow these girls to be taken, he said, voice steady. We will not allow injustice to win. Reporters shouted questions, but Jamal simply ushered the girls back inside. Later, as they sat in the shelter's tiny common room, Zoe climbed onto his lap. Are you our hero now? She asked sleepily. Jamal hugged her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. I'm trying, he whispered. But deep down he knew the real heroes were the girls themselves, fighting every day. Surviving, still smiling. He owed them more than just protection. He owed them a future. Tomorrow he would stand in court and fight for that future, and he would not back down. See, the courtroom buzzed with tension as Jamal adjusted the knot of his charcoal gray tie, standing just behind Malika at the plaintiff's table. The gallery was packed wall to wall with reporters, activists, curious citizens, and a handful of grim-faced bureaucrats who clearly resented the sudden flood of attention. At the defense table, the state's attorney, Philip Crane, flipped through a folder with the frantic energy of a man who knew the ground beneath him was crumbling fast. Judge Ellen Ramsey, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s with a reputation for fairness, presided today. Her gaze swept the room like a searchlight before she nodded for proceedings to begin. Counselor Bryant, she said, her voice carrying easily over the tense silence. You may proceed. Malika stood, calm and composed. Your Honor, we are seeking immediate court-ordered custody of Ayanna, Nia, Zoe, and Maya Evans by their biological father, Mr. Jamal Carter, pending the full exoneration of their mother, Mrs. Sierra Evans. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Crane stood so quickly his chair clattered backward. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Carter's paternity has not been formally established. Malika lifted a slim file. DNA results, Your Honor. Verified and notarized, a probability of 99.999999%. All 4 children are Mr. Carter's biological daughters. Judge Ramsey's eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed. Objection overruled. Crane sputtered but said nothing. Jamal exhaled slowly. One hurdle crossed. Malika continued. Furthermore, we have evidence that the state's Child Protective Services attempted to remove the girls under false pretenses, orchestrated through fabricated concerns regarding their welfare. These actions were taken without regard for the girl's best interests and against standing shelter protections. She clicked a remote, and images flashed onto the screen beside her. Photos of Ayana, Nia, Zoe, and Maya, helping younger children at the shelter, organizing flower sales, sharing their meager lunches. These are not neglected children. They are survivors. Fighters. They have endured the unimaginable and emerged stronger. Jamal watched the girls in the photos, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow. They deserve stability, Malika concluded. They deserve family. They deserve justice. Judge Ramsey nodded gravely. I will hear from the defense. Crane scrambled to his feet, all bluster and desperation. Your Honor, we contend that Mr. Carter's sudden involvement is self-serving, publicity-driven. He abandoned these children for years and only intervened when media attention threatened his reputation. Jamal stood slowly, cutting through the prosecutor's noise like a blade. Your Honor, he said quietly. May I speak? Ramsey studied him for a long moment before nodding. Proceed, Mr. Carter. Jamal stepped forward, every eye in the room fixed on him. I didn't know about them, he said simply. I didn't know they existed. If I had, I would have moved heaven and earth to find them. He glanced at the girls, who sat clutching Ruth's hands in the front row. I can't change the past, but I can fight like hell for their future, and that's what I'm here to do. Not for publicity. Not for redemption. For them. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Across the aisle, Crane's face twisted with frustration, sensing he was losing. Judge Ramsey tapped her pen against the bench thoughtfully. I will take this under advisement, she said. Recess until 2 p.m. As the room emptied, Jamal turned to Ruth. How are they holding up? Better than most adults would, she said with a small, proud smile. Outside, the air was brisk, biting against the exposed skin of Jamal's face. Camera flashes popped like fireworks as he and the girls exited the courthouse, but he kept his head high, Zoe clinging to his hand. Midway down the steps, Jamal's phone buzzed. A text from Malika. Meet me behind the building. Now. Alarm prickled along his spine. He herded Ruth and the girls toward their waiting SUV before slipping around the side of the building, where Malika stood in the shadow of a maintenance door, her expression grim. You're not going to like this, she said without preamble. I just got word from one of my contacts in the DA's office. Crane is pulling every dirty trick in the book. Such as? Jamal asked, jaw tightening. They're trying to argue that because you had no prior contact with the girls, you can't be considered a suitable guardian without a lengthy evaluation period. Lengthy? Months, maybe a year, and during that time they could be placed in foster care. No, Jamal said immediately. No way. Malika held up a hand. I'm already working a plan. We're petitioning for an emergency temporary guardianship based on extraordinary circumstances. But we're going to need more than just DNA. What do you need from me? A character witness, someone unimpeachable, someone who can testify to your capacity to be a father. Jamal's mind raced. His corporate allies wouldn't cut it. He needed someone personal, real. My grandmother, he said finally. Nana Ruby. Malika's eyes lit up. Perfect. Can she get here today? She'll move mountains. He was already dialing before he finished the sentence. 3 hours later, Nana Ruby, a regal woman in her late 70s, wearing a vivid teal coat and a Sunday hat with a silk flower pinned to it, sat proudly in the witness chair. Her voice, rich and commanding, filled the courtroom. My grandson is many things, she said firmly. Successful, stubborn, sometimes foolish. But he is loyal, protective, and he knows the value of family because I raised him that way. She pointed at Jamal with a crooked finger. He won't fail those girls, not on my watch, and certainly not on his. There wasn't a dry eye in the room except Crane's, who looked like he was chewing glass. When Nana Ruby finished, Judge Ramsey called for silence. "I've heard enough," she said. She turned to Jamal. "Mr. Carter, pending a home inspection and routine background checks, which I suspect you will pass, you are hereby granted temporary custody of Ayanna, Nia, Zoe, and Maya Evans." Cheers broke out in the courtroom. The girls ran to Jamal, Zoe reaching him first, her small hands clutching at his coat. "You're really our dad now?" she asked, wide-eyed. Jamal knelt, gathering all four of them into his arms. "Yeah, baby girl," he whispered. "I always was." As the bailiff called for order, Jamal pressed his forehead against Zoe's and closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. For the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't standing alone. He had found his family, and he wasn't letting go. Night blanketed the city by the time Jamal pulled the SUV into the small driveway of the brownstone he'd bought under a shell corporation 3 weeks ago. It wasn't the high-rise penthouse he was used to, but it was warm, safe, and had enough rooms for each girl to finally have a space of her own. The girls practically exploded out of the car, their excitement infectious even after the long day. Ruth, exhausted but smiling, shepherded them inside while Jamal grabbed the last of the bags. As he locked the car, his phone buzzed. A text from Malika. "Heads up. Crane and the old guard aren't done. They're planning something. Meet tomorrow. Urgent." Jamal pocketed the phone without replying. Let them come. This time he was ready. Inside, the brownstone already felt alive. Nia and Zoe were arguing good-naturedly over bedroom choices. Ayanna was exploring the kitchen drawers, and Maya had discovered the back patio, already declaring it perfect for a secret garden. Jamal leaned against the doorframe, watching them with a strange tightness in his chest. It wasn't just pride or relief. It was the terrifying weight of love, heavy and thrilling all at once. "Big feelings, huh?" Ruth said, coming to stand beside him. He chuckled quietly. "Biggest of my life." "They're good kids," she said. "Strong, resilient. But they're still kids. They're gonna test you." "I expect nothing less," Jamal said with a soft smile. "I'm ready." "You say that now," Ruth teased. "Wait till one of them borrows your credit card." He laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months. Later that night, after the girls were tucked into beds freshly made with cartoon-printed sheets and worn-out teddy bears, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, Ruth across from him. "They don't know everything yet," he said. "About Sierra, about the fight ahead." "They don't need the full weight of it," Ruth replied. "Not yet. Right now they need stability, routine, someone who shows up every day." "I'll be that someone," Jamal said without hesitation. Ruth studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you." Before either could say more, the front door rattled violently, the sharp sound echoing through the house. Jamal was on his feet instantly. Ruth moved to gather the girls, whispering reassurances. Jamal cracked the door open carefully. Standing there, not bothering to hide his disdain, was Councilman Desmond Brooks, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. "Mr. Carter," Brooks said, his smile oily, "I hear congratulations are in order. Temporary custody and all that." "What do you want?" Jamal asked, voice low. "I came to deliver a warning. Some of us don't appreciate you poking your nose where it doesn't belong." The officers behind Brooks shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "This isn't a threat?" Jamal asked. Brooks chuckled. "Of course not. Just friendly advice. Watch yourself. Custody arrangements can be very delicate. Jamal's hands curled into fists at his sides. You're threatening to take them away. Brooks shrugged. I'm reminding you that the system has rules, and those rules don't bend just because you have deep pockets. You mean rules like forging evidence? Pressuring judges? Stealing children from their families? Jamal snapped. Brooks' smile thinned. Careful, Carter. Your new life is fragile. Don't let your temper ruin it. With that, he turned and walked back to the waiting black SUV. Jamal stood there for a long moment, fury vibrating in every muscle, before he locked the door and returned to Ruth. What was that about? She asked. Brooks, Jamal said shortly. He's part of it, whatever it is. You're not alone in this, Ruth reminded him, and you're not powerless. No, Jamal agreed. I'm not. The next morning, Jamal met Malika in a quiet corner booth of a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. She slid a manila envelope across the table to him. Everything you need, she said. Emails, bank transfers, surveillance photos, Crane, Brooks, and a few others. They've been siphoning funds meant for shelters like Hope Haven for years. And framing families to cover their tracks, Jamal said grimly. Malika nodded. And there's more. Sierra's sentencing wasn't just harsh. It was strategic. A message. She filed a complaint against Brooks years ago when she worked city social services. He made sure she paid for it. Jamal closed his eyes for a second, breathing through the rage. What do we do? He asked finally. We go public, Malika said. We file suit. Federal, civil rights violations. Corruption. Targeted persecution. They'll come after me. They already are, she said bluntly. But you have something they don't. What's that? She smiled. Truth, and 4 little girls who will stand beside you when the smoke clears. Jamal opened the envelope, scanning the first page. Names. Dates. Figures. Enough to destroy a dozen careers. He thought of Zoe's shy smile, Ayana's stubborn tilt of her chin, Nia's laugh. Maya's fierce loyalty. It wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. I'll do it, he said. Malika leaned back, satisfied. Then buckle up, she said. We're about to start a war. Across the street, in a black sedan with tinted windows, Councilman Brooks watched Jamal through binoculars, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake, Carter, he muttered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. But deep down, even Brooks felt the tremor of fear. Because somewhere, in the quiet marrow of his bones, he knew. This time, Jamal Carter wasn't going to back down. This time, justice was coming. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy as Jamal Carter walked through the heavy oak doors, Malika beside him. Cameras flashed from the hallway as reporters scrambled to get a glimpse of the man who had dared to challenge the system from which he had once profited. He adjusted the cuffs of his navy suit, a far cry from the sharp, intimidating armor he used to wear. Today, his suit wasn't about power. It was about standing tall for the people who had no voice. The gallery was packed. Activists, journalists, a handful of Hope Haven residents, even a few wary city officials who had quietly switched sides as the investigation deepened. And in the front row, Ruth sat with the quadruplets, each girl dressed neatly in matching blue dresses, holding hands tightly. When Jamal caught Zoe's eye, she smiled so brightly that for a moment, the tension melted away. Ready? Malika murmured. As I'll ever be, he answered. Judge Rosenthal, a sharp-eyed black woman with a reputation for integrity, presided over the hearing. She reviewed the mountain of evidence Jamal's legal team had presented: falsified records, diverted funds, backroom deals, and the malicious targeting of vulnerable families. Desmond Brooks sat stiffly at the defendant's table, sweat glistening on his brow. Crane wasn't there. He had already fled the country 2 nights before the hearing, his assets frozen, and his name splashed across every news outlet. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Jamal spoke, not from prepared notes, but from his heart. "I grew up believing justice was something you earned," he said. "If you worked hard enough, made enough money, you could protect yourself and your family. I believed that, until I saw 4 little girls selling flowers in the cold just to survive. Until I learned that their mother had been crushed by a system designed not to protect, but to punish." He turned slightly, his voice steady. "This isn't just about them. It's about every child who went to sleep hungry because someone lined their pockets with money meant for shelters. It's about every mother who was told her life didn't matter because she couldn't pay a lawyer to fight for her. It's about a city that forgot what justice really means." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm not here to reclaim my reputation. I'm here to reclaim my humanity." Whispers spread like wildfire through the courtroom. Jamal's authenticity was undeniable. Even the most cynical reporters scribbled furiously. When the judge recessed to deliberate, the room exhaled all at once. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a crowd had gathered, waving signs: "Justice for families, hope not corruption, we stand with Carter." Jamal emerged to a sea of cheers. Ruth held Ayanna's hand tightly as they stood slightly back, allowing Jamal to face the cameras. But he didn't speak to the press. Instead, he knelt before the girls, looking each one in the eye. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "No matter what happens, never forget how strong you are." Nia leaned forward impulsively, wrapping her arms around his neck. The others followed, and for a moment, there was only the warmth of their small bodies, their fierce, innocent loyalty. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Desmond Brooks was to be indicted on charges of conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. The city was ordered to compensate Hope Haven and other shelters wrongfully defunded during the years of fraud. Jamal's petition for full custody of the quadruplets was granted without opposition. Sierra would be released immediately, with all charges expunged from her record. As the news rippled through the city, the Montgomery and Crane names fell from grace, replaced by stories of resilience, reparation, and reckoning. At the brownstone that evening, a modest celebration unfolded. Homemade cupcakes, paper streamers, and an off-key rendition of "Lean on Me" that had Ruth wiping tears from her eyes. Jamal found Sierra standing quietly on the back patio, watching the stars blink into life across the night sky. He approached slowly. "They're sleeping," she said without turning. "All 4 piled into one bed. I didn't have the heart to separate them tonight." He chuckled quietly. "Sounds about right." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the cool spring breeze carrying the scent of the lilac bushes Zoe had insisted on planting. "I owe you an apology," Jamal said at last, voice low. 10 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life." Sierra turned to him, her face illuminated by the porch light. "You can't change the past," she said gently. "You can only choose who you are today." "I choose them," he said. "And if you'll let me, I choose to be part of whatever future they dream for themselves." Sierra studied him, then nodded once. "Good," she said simply, "because they deserve nothing less." Later that night, after Ruth and Sierra had gone to bed, Jamal sat alone in the living room, the house wrapped in peaceful silence. He opened his laptop, navigating to a blank page. The Carter Foundation for Justice and Family Advocacy Mission. to fight for families failed by the system, and to remind the world that every life deserves dignity, hope, and a future. He stared at the words for a long time before hitting save. Tomorrow he would face the world again. More cameras, more courtrooms, more battles. But tonight, he simply listened to the soft breathing of his daughters upstairs and the new heartbeat of a life he never imagined he'd deserve. Because real power, he realized, wasn't measured in dollars or titles. It was measured in the lives you fought for, and Jamal Carter was ready to fight for his family, for good. Thank you for joining this journey. If you believe in stories where hope conquers fear, where second chances bloom, and where family can be found in the unlikeliest moments, please support our channel. Subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story to remind someone out there. It's never too late to do the right thing.